Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow?
New York is open! Oakland is New York! New York is open! Oakland is New York!
New York marches in solidarity with injured Occupy protester Scott Olson.
I'm like many other veterans who, of the Vietnam era, are getting older, are unemployed, are homeless, are out on the street. I was extremely angry, outraged at what I saw happen last night in Oakland, California.
About face in Oakland, Mayor Gene Kwan's legal advisor, Dan Siegel, says, "I think a big mistake was made, a big mistake. He is considering resigning." The mayor claims she did not know the raid was happening.
I didn't know what day. I was actually hoping that it wouldn't be until I got back.
But tonight, the protest resumes. Frank Ogawa Plaza reopened to Occupy with a minimal police presence.
Oakland is a very progressive city. We support the goals of the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Oakland skull fracture victim Scott Olson upgraded to fair condition, now breathing on his own, says his roommate Keith Shannon, but now also facing surgery. New York on night 40.
Who do you serve? Who do you protect? Who do you serve? Who do you protect?
14 more arrested. As Marines in uniform join the protest, NYPD lets Occupy Wall Street actually march on the street and then hits them with batons, even the Marines. Support stronger than ever. 71% in New York State support Occupy's right to protest. That's 71% of New York's Republicans. Michael Moore, as the sincerity of some in the 1% advocating for the rights of those in the 99% is questioned. His answer, he writes, "How can you claim to be for the poor when you are the opposite of poor? It's like asking, you've never had sex with another man. How can you be for gay marriage?" Occupy Day 41 with New York protester Sergeant Shamar Thomas, with AlterNet's Joshua Holland in Oakland, with Michael Moore, and with Vlad Teichberg. Who? One of the keys to Occupy internet streaming, without whom you would perhaps never have seen this from last night. All that and more now on Countdown.
March with Oakland!
Good evening from New York. This is Thursday, October 27th, 376 days until the 2012 presidential election. And there is news breaking at this hour from Oakland, California. Scott Olson, the Iraq Marine veteran whose skull was fractured Tuesday night by a police gas canister during the suppression of Occupy Oakland, has just awakened. His roommate Keith Shannon telling Countdown that while Olson cannot yet speak, his parents say he's been able to write a little. Earlier in the day, his condition had been upgraded from critical to fair. More details on Olson in a moment. While Oakland Mayor Gene Kwan has told Occupy protesters they can return to the plaza there, Occupy Oakland is calling now for a citywide general strike for the 2nd of next month. The fifth story on the Countdown, the Occupy movement digging in and pushing back as it comes under increasing pressure to literally fold up its tents. Plus what appears to be another incident of police violence against protesters during an otherwise peaceful march last night in New York. First, more on Scott Olson. As we told you, according to Keith Shannon, after having been sedated since he walked into an Oakland hospital after his skull was fractured on Tuesday night, Olson came out of the sedation this afternoon and awakened, not yet able to talk, but off the ventilator and breathing on his own. He may yet go into neurosurgery in the next day or two to relieve pressure on his brain. It's not apparent what the latest development says about the likelihood or unlikelihood of surgery. Olson's parents are at the hospital, are obviously having arrived from their Wisconsin home. As Countdown reported last night, Olson was struck on the head, apparently by a tear gas canister fired by police of some kind during the Tuesday raid in Oakland. Olson's uncle, George Nygaard, told reporters he was disgusted.
Now he gets wounded by people that we call peacemakers, and police. I'm simply enraged, angered, and saddened all at the same time.
In New York last night, Occupy Wall Street protesters marched in solidarity with Occupy Oakland, blocking traffic in some cases as they surged up the streets.
I was extremely angry, outraged at what I saw happen last night in Oakland, California.
In the vanguard, a group of veterans, including Sergeant Shamar Thomas, the Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War, who appeared on this program last week after he had defended protesters from police during a weekend march in Times Square. His efforts were needed. A camera caught at least one incident in which an NYPD officer appears to be beating a helpless protester. Center of your screen. And Sergeant Thomas says he defended other protesters last night and was struck in the back with police batons for his efforts. He'll join us in a few moments. And the NYPD Sergeant Union tonight issued a warning to Occupy Wall Street. If one union member is hurt in an Occupy demonstration, the union says it will file civil lawsuits against individual protesters and any group supporting Occupy Wall Street in its camp at Zuccotti Park. Other New Yorkers taking an entirely different view of the protests, near total support of them. According to a Quinnipiac University poll, 58% of New York voters agree with Occupy Wall Street's views, just 28% disagree, and when it comes to Occupy's right to protest, 82% support it, only 13% do not. Among the supporters, 71% of New York's Republican voters. In Oakland, Occupy protesters struggled again with police and each other as a fence was erected to allow the campsite at Frank Ogawa Plaza to be cleaned. This after Tuesday's protests, which led to those 100 arrests and the unknown number of injuries. Mayor Kwan, whose resignation or repentance I called for last night, held a news conference after that event in which, forgivably or not, she clearly appeared to have been out of touch with the situation in her own city, both before and after the police broke up the camp.
I don't know everything. I'm still listening. I don't do the tactical planning. I didn't know what day. I was actually hoping that it wouldn't be until I got back. It seemed that was done as peacefully as possible. But I'm now hearing that maybe there's one or two incidents that we don't know. We've asked the police department to assign an officer to investigate.
After that news conference, but before Occupy called for a general strike on November 2nd, Mayor Kwan also released a statement in which she praised the efforts of 99% of the police, called for a minimal police presence at the plaza, at least for the short term, and claimed she understood the impact of the violence on the community. I want to express our deepest concern for all those who were injured last night, and we are committed to ensuring this does not happen again. Most of us are part of the 99% and understand the spirit of the Occupy Wall Street movement. We are committed to honoring their free speech right. Across the bay, Occupy San Francisco's camp was quiet this morning after police first gathered in force nearby and then pulled back. Protesters say police gave them written notice that a planned raid on the camp had been called off. No reason given. In London, England, Canon Chancellor Giles Fraser of St. Paul's Cathedral, who had welcomed protesters to his historic church, has now stepped down from his post. No reason given. The church is considering legal action to have protesters camped outside that church removed. Egyptian revolutionaries from the Tahrir Square protests in Cairo say they will march in support of Occupy Wall Street tomorrow. And in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Occupy protesters gathered outside the private Walden Club, where House Speaker John Boehner was taking part in a fundraiser, seats going for up to $10,000 apiece. The protesters said they wanted politicians to work for their jobs instead of raising money for their campaigns.
For too long, we've been apathetic. For too long, we let the people with money make the decisions. And it's time for that to stop.
Sergeant Shamar Thomas, the Iraq War veteran who marched with Occupy Wall Street last night, took a few blows to the back from police for his efforts, joins me once again. Good to see you, sir.
Keith.
Were you part of an organized veterans group last night? Were you there for Oakland? Why were you there last night?
Well, I was there in support of Oakland and because a Marine was injured, Scott Olsen. What happened was I actually have different accounts set up, and I set up accounts where I told people I'm going to, go down there in support of Oakland. So there were veterans, in uniform and not in uniform that met me down there and, marched with me.
How many, roughly, do you have any idea how many of you guys were there?
The rough number, I would say at least 25. Veterans, but a lot of them weren't in uniform, and a lot of them didn't stand just in, in security. There was certain veterans that were like, we'll just stand in the back just to keep your back. So.
Have you heard the criticism from the right wing that there can't possibly be any military people involved in this, that those must just be uniforms bought at an Army-Navy store?
That has been a really big deal, especially over the internet, that we're all fake veterans, that we were there and planted. But my whole family has served. I have served. I don't lie about my service. And the veterans that were down there are true veterans and have a lot of them have served in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars.
I was a little confused, and I'm sure you're even more so having been there. I was a little confused at the police response last night because there seemed to be two different parts of it. They seemed to be just as willing to crack batons as you would know much more than I. But at the other part, they did not succeed in stopping the protesters from going on the street without a pre-planned schedule and permit and everything else. So they were they being very concerned about the small details of individual people, but not that concerned about the whole march?
Well, what happened initially was that the people that were out there, we were peacefully protesting, honestly, staying on the sidewalks, and and say somebody would take, slip off the sidewalk. I saw a police officer, push a man down for, slipping on the street. And so what happened was there were different acts of brutality from the police, and people decided that we were just going to take it to the streets. And that's where the street came from, just the brutality. And honestly, being there and seeing what was going on, I even stood in the street and told people, hey, guys, get on the sidewalk, get on the sidewalk. We don't want any of this. And when I saw the police continue, they started bringing out the nets. Everybody's like, what are these nets for, and different things like that. It just incited people. Their actions incited people.
But it was amazing, though, that at that point when everybody went into the street, that's when the police got out of the way, right? I mean, towards the last part of that march was fairly free form, wasn't it?
Well, actually, we were going against traffic,
right?
So they couldn't, they couldn't amass anybody to stop us.
Excellent.
So, and we kept, we didn't have a planned route, so we just kept making turns to, they couldn't keep up with us pretty much. It wasn't that they didn't want to. They tried, and they even had like different barricades at certain points where they had motorized scooters come in, and I actually saw a policeman rev up his scooter to try to hit one of the protesters from getting by. So the actions out there last night it was unbelievable.
Yeah, they didn't back off. They just failed, essentially.
They just
last
failed.
Night. All right. Well, and to that point, there's some level of people not listening that we've seen throughout this at many different stages, from mayors to presidential candidates to all sorts of others. The NYPD Sergeants Union threatened to sue people if anybody gets hurt. That's one of the craziest sounding things I've ever heard. What's your reaction to it?
My reaction to it is, if you're willing to sue people, you should be more willing to, do your job more professionally. Not to say that all cops aren't professional, but what I saw last night just reaffirmed why I do what I do and why I'm speaking out. Because honestly, I thought that what I said would have an effect, honestly, because it got so much attention. But to see the faces of anger on these cops just hitting people, I had to, I stood in front of some protesters there. I saw like women, and I stretched my arms out, and the cop just started beating me in the back, and I was holding the protesters back. So, to be a part of that was like, come on, is this really professionalism? Is this really what you're really out here doing? It's unbelievable.
They will be the last to hear you, but everybody else has already, so congratulations on that, and be of good cheer with the rest of it. Sergeant Shamar Thomas, the Iraq War veteran who's now defending his countrymen at Occupy Wall Street from the NYPD. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For more now from Oakland, I'm joined by Joshua Holland, senior writer and editor with AlterNet, author of The 15 Biggest Lies About the Economy, and himself an Occupy Oakland protester. Joshua, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
All right, so let me just reiterate the breaking news about the condition of Scott Olson. As I said, his roommate Keith Shannon has told us that he's awakened, that he hasn't been able to speak yet, but he has been able to make communications by writing. They say his spelling seems to be a little bit off, but there's very hopeful signs coming out of that. What is that? I mean, I'm sure that news has not spread through the community yet because it's less than half an hour old, but I imagine that will have a very positive impact on what's going on there.
Well, news moves very quickly. I mean, with social media, I think everybody's very pleased that he wasn't. He appears to be coming out of the woods, and this has certainly girded the movement. I mean, on Tuesday there was an enormous amount of violence. There were maybe 500 protesters out there. Last night, I would say that there was 3 times that number. So, these aggressive police actions, I think, have the opposite of their desired effect. They may think that this is going to dissuade people from coming out and exercising their free speech rights. It is the opposite. Every time I go down there, I see bigger crowds than the time before.
What is going on there tonight? I mean, there's some confusion about this. Are they, in fact, moving back into Ogawa Plaza? Is it going to be open 24 hours a day? What's the plan?
So far, Mayor Jean Kwan has reversed herself. She's promising a minimal police presence. A tent is back in the plaza. At least one. I haven't been there today. I'm going to go out after this. There's a planning meeting for the general strike that you mentioned in your opening on November 2nd at 5 o'clock, and then they're going to have a general assembly at 7 p.m.
Any particulars on the general strike? Is there any indication of the level of support? General strikes have not been traditionally big things in the United States, certainly not since about the 1880s or 90s, I would think.
Well, they're illegal in many contexts when they're called by unions. This was just passed at the end of last night's General Assembly, and I think that the planning session today is going to define some of those questions.
A couple questions about Mayor Kwan and the police violence. She said that the police presence will be minimal from here on in. Is any idea what that means? Does the Occupy group have any idea what that's supposed to mean?
I mean, the difference is night and day. On Tuesday, there were hundreds of police in riot gear. Last night, night, there were just a scattered handful of police officers around the plaza. They were calm. They were not dressed up for war. This is a complete reversal on the part of the mayor. And I should point out that, Oakland has very severe problems with its police department. Yes. It's been under federal consent decree since 2003. It had to settle a civil lawsuit in 2003 for using wooden bullets and chemical weapons on anti-Iraq war protesters. And just 2 weeks ago, the Federal Monitor issued a report that found that almost 30% of the time that Oakland Police Department officers drew their weapons, it was, quote, inappropriate and unnecessary. So this is a really problem-plagued department.
I was on the radio in San Francisco with my old friend Gil Gross this afternoon, and he said that he'd interviewed somebody who was involved in this with what the mayor said about she wasn't in town, she wasn't responsible for the planning of Tuesday night, she's never been to Oakland, she doesn't know what a policeman is. There was a simple sort of reaction to this of, are you kidding me? Because A, if that's true, maybe she shouldn't be mayor because she doesn't have any control over the situation, and B, if it's not true and she's making up a story. Do we have any idea what the truth is?
Well, I don't think we can know for sure, but I think it's important to remember that this is a very progressive community. Yep. I'm sure if you did a poll here, you mentioned the polling in New York, you'd see 90% support. This is not a popular action. I mean, these images of violent crackdowns are not playing well here. There was just a recall petition filed for Mayor Kwan. So I believe that she's distancing herself from the events of Tuesday and doing so rather clumsily.
Yeah, but regardless of how clumsy it might be, is it a climb down on her part? And if it's a climb down, do you think Occupy Oakland and those who support Occupy Oakland are willing to say, okay, you get one climb down?
It's a fluid situation. As far as it looks right now, it's a dramatic reversal, a climb down. They're standing down. I mean, the amount of violence that there was on Tuesday was really remarkable. Yeah. Things are peaceful now in Oakland. So I don't know if it will remain that way. I don't know if they'll tolerate a larger camp. But so far, we're seeing just a really dramatic reversal from the stance that the mayor's office had taken earlier.
Indeed. Joshua Holland of AlterNet on the breaking developments in Oakland. Again, great thanks.
Thanks, Keith.
More mayors than just Jean Kwan are facing the dilemma of what to do when the protesters are right, but the bankers own their city and their tax base. And the latest attack on Occupy from the lunatic right-wing fringe. Anybody who makes any money and still supports Occupy Wall Street is either faking it or a hypocrite. Michael Moore joins me on both subjects next.
Succeeding in today's market requires more than wishful thinking. It requires determination.
It was out of her reach until she heard about the value plan. Shop less, get more. Make one call to an Allstate agent.
Michael Moore on the Occupy dilemma approaching a lot of America's mayors, not just Jean Kwan of Oakland, and the nonsense argument that people who make any money are not sincere when advocating for those who do not. The Occupy joke goes, the revolution will not be televised, it'll be on the internet. We'll meet a man who, as much as any other, is responsible for that. The bizarre New York Times story that says his own campaign staffers got an email saying they must never ever actually talk to Herman Cain unless he talks to them first. Well, I can abide by that. And Rick Perry's spokesman says the governor may skip some of the remaining Republican debates. I'm supposed to notice how. Michael Moore next on Countdown. It's crunch time for Occupy, not for the protesters. In our fourth story tonight, for the nation's mayors. We don't have major metropolitan agricultural cities in this country anymore. Ours are predicated on business and finance and the tax base to which they contribute. So mayors from Nashville to L.A. to Oakland have been under increasing corporate pressure to break up protests, and their talk is now getting tougher. Michael Moore joins me in just a moment. First to Nashville, where Occupy leaders say authorities have given them an ultimatum. Get out by 8 p.m. tonight or be arrested. The group is now assembling, pledging to stand its ground.
We're all one country together. They can't run us off for that. This is public property. We have freedom of speech. That's part of our Constitution. They can't tell us that.
Across the country, those cities are doing just that. In Atlanta, Mayor Kasim Reed has ordered protesters to be out within 2 weeks. This after police in riot gear arrested 52 people yesterday. Just hours after those protesters were released today, Occupy Atlanta leaders still vowing not to go anywhere. In the West Coast, Los Angeles city officials who had first embraced the Occupy movement are now indicating the protesters have worn out their welcome. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa saying today that the encampment, quote, cannot continue indefinitely. In response, protesters issued a statement vowing to continue indefinitely. Meanwhile, since protests started in Chicago, more than 300 people have been arrested there for trying to spend the night in Grant Park. And yesterday, a group marched to City Hall carrying a petition with more than 12,000 signatures demanding that Mayor Rahm Emanuel allow them to camp there. His staff accepted the petition, but he has yet to respond. Meantime, New York's Mayor Bloomberg has said he hopes the coming cold weather will do his dirty work for him. And events in Denver could be the first indication of whether or not he might be right. Major snowstorm hit Colorado yesterday. At least 2 protesters went to the hospital with hypothermia. Still, leaders there are vowing to remain and have put out requests for winter supplies. As promised, Michael Moore, author of the new book, Here Comes Trouble. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. I just came from downtown, from Occupy Wall Street. It's a bone-chilling rain out there right now.
And you got caught in it.
And yes, but I tell you, the place is still packed with people. And you mentioned about the upcoming winter. There are a couple of representatives that have come from Occupy Anchorage to advise here how to do cold weather camping in the park, and there's now an ice company here in New York that has offered to provide large blocks of ice if they wanted to make igloos there to stay warm in. So I don't think the weather is going to be the problem for Mayor Bloomberg.
Do we know, do they have, or might they rush through the city council a resolution against igloo construction in Manhattan?
No igloos.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they tried it.
Well, you know, I mean, this just shows. Yep. It's interesting. You're going through a list of cities there. Those are all pretty much, if I can do my political thing correctly here, they are all run by Democratic Party mayors. Yep. So this is a problem because you're going to have Democrats breaking up these modern-day Hoovervilles. Yeah. Now, this is what's going to happen throughout the fall and winter. You're going to have these encampments, hundreds of them across the country, like you had in the early 1930s. Those, if people don't know what Hoovervilles are, young people watching or whatever, they can look it up. There's good documentaries on it. But basically, people in the early part of the Depression formed these encampments right on the National Malls. Of course, the famous incident where General MacArthur, on the orders of Herbert Hoover,
the army
burned it down.
The bonus army.
Yes, but
there was one in Central Park. They had several of them in Central Park.
59th Street. They were all over Manhattan. They were all over the country. And historians feel now, they had the same sort of thing back. Well, what do you want? And other than the bonus army, they wanted their bonus. Right. But everybody else, what do you want? Well, what does it look like we want?
Yeah,
There's a depression.
Homes. We have no homes and no jobs. Yes.
It's like, what a ridiculous question. But they said at the time, you know, well, it wasn't organized, or it wasn't this, there wasn't one leader behind it or whatever. But now what we know is those Hoovervilles helped to really usher in Roosevelt and his ability to pass a New Deal, because there was so much sympathy amongst the public for the people in these encampments.
Well, but to that point, did those who support this just get a template of what could happen to particularly liberal and Democratic mayors who take action from the story in Oakland? Because Jean Kwan's legal advisor, her #1 legal person in City Hall, after Tuesday night said, this is a terrible mistake. I'm thinking of resigning from working with her again. She got, and not just from me calling on her to resign, but she just got crucified on the West Coast, and particularly in the Bay Area, and she did a 180 on this. She's now done everything but bring the milk and cookies.
Right, and I hope that she does bring the milk and cookies.
Not a bad idea.
And in fact, I'm actually going there tomorrow. I'm going to Oakland, and I'm going to stand there with people there, because this is a nonviolent movement. This is a peaceful movement. The only violence that really has been perpetrated here has been by certain police in certain cities. Even the acting police chief there of Oakland doesn't even know who of the 18 different police forces in the Bay Area fired those rubber bullets.
You think that's a coincidence? Think that's why they had 18 different police forces, so nobody knew what the other one was doing?
Well, then that's some very smart thinking on their part. Yeah. I think, too, just if I can broaden the Democratic Party problem here to a national scale.
Yes, please.
You've got these 9 Republicans running, all right? And, of course, we all laugh, and there's the joke you can make about each one of them, and we know that our fellow Americans, at the end of the day, they're not going to go in the voting booth and vote for crazy. Even though they might be upset at Obama, they're not going to go crazy. So it begs the question then, if this is the party of the rich, the Republicans, if this is the party of wealth in Wall Street, the party that brought about the crash of '08, why aren't the wealthy making sure they have a Republican that's running that's going to win? It doesn't look like they're concerned at all about making sure they've got their man on the Republican ticket, unless they believe they've got their man on the Democratic Party ticket. And if that's the case, okay, well, then we're in for a longer haul than just igloos in the winter here in Manhattan.
But as you say, as the Hoovervilles helped pave the way for Roosevelt to go much further to his own left than he had ever been as a governor in New York or any other office he ever held, there is always that other side. Political pressure is a horrible thing to see, except if it's on your side.
That's right. And Barack Obama has a unique historical opportunity to be the representative of those who are now the majority of this country, the majority who support Occupy Wall Street, the vast majority that want taxes raised on the wealthy, the majority who want an investigation of the '08 crash and people put in jail if necessary. That's the majority of the country. So Barack Obama one thing he needs to hear from this whole Occupy movement is, look, if you really want to take a leap into the deep end here, we've got your back.
Yeah, the deep end is only about 2 feet at the moment.
Yeah, right, yeah. It's not that scary anymore.
All right, well, I want to get into this nonsense about how you're part of the 1% and I'm part of 1%, and therefore we should be ignored when we say anything in the defense of the rights of everybody else, but we have some commercials first.
Right.
How fitting.
Okay.
We'll pick it up with Michael Moore right after this.
Martha, where are you? Upstate.
Two quick headlines from different ends of the coasts. The Los Angeles Times reports that neurosurgeons are saying that Scott Olson will they believe he needs brain surgery at some point. As we told you earlier exclusively here on Countdown, Scott Olson awakened this afternoon from sedation and was able to write a few words, although he's not yet been able to speak. He, of course, the injured Marine, hit with a gas canister by police in Oakland on Tuesday night. And from Occupy Wall Street, you may have heard earlier that there's going to be in Oakland a general strike on November 2nd, or an attempt at one at least, from OWS. We support the call of Occupy Oakland for a national day of protest, a general strike on November 2nd, 2011. So there is going to be an attempt at a general strike in New York City as well, and Occupy Wall Street is hoping to make that a national event as of November 2nd. Back with Michael Moore in our third story in the Countdown tonight. After claiming Occupy was anti-Semitic, racist, a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, and Acorn under a new name, the newest attack is that you can't believe Occupy because some of those who've supported it, like Michael or Alec Baldwin or David Letterman or me, make a nice living. Michael's posted at michaelmoore.com and Daily Kos an account of his rags to riches trajectory of his career that followed his breakthrough movie, Roger and Me, about GM and Flint in 1989. The latter recounts how sudden wealth and good fortune affects or doesn't affect class consciousness and what some people have called class warfare. Skeptics and critics of Michael, and there are a few, wonder how a man with wealth can stay true to his roots and not just go with the money flow. And before I talk about you or me, let's talk about the sophistry inculcated into this.
Right.
Anybody supporting people who make less money than they do is either lying or a hypocrite. Huh?
Right. No, it'd be like if, because I've never had sex with a man, therefore, what are you doing supporting gay marriage?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, women got the right to vote because only men actually could vote for that amendment to give women the right to vote. I mean, historically, obviously, people come from all places in support of the things they support. And frankly, what I've said is that, they ridicule or Kanye West or others for going down there. And I'm thinking, first of all, he doesn't have to be down there. He's down there actually working against his own personal financial interests.
Correct.
Because he's down there supporting a tax increase on him. And if anything, he should be thanked for that, because generally what the system does is as soon as they give you money, you're supposed to get in line, be part of the club, and parrot what you're supposed to say. And so I think what drives him crazy about people like you or me or David Letterman or whatever, it's an odd argument to make on their end because they're all about money. And then if one of us comes from the other side and we do well, it seems a little hypocritical on their part. But I think what they're really worried about is that you or I, with money, are dangerous people.
Right.
Because
we can't be bought because we already have the money.
And nobody can come down here and say in the next segment, Keith, we don't want you to do that you were going to do.
Yeah.
Because I don't, where I'm from in Michigan, we call it, FU money,
Yeah, exactly.
basically,
Right.
because it allows you to have that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an odd thing. It often comes from people who obviously have a gazillion dollars themselves. And
Well, yeah. What was that all about? That was you with Piers Morgan, this guy on CNN the other night. You have to confess that it's bleeding obvious you're part of the 1%. I believe the British would call this guy a ponce, I believe is the term, which is kind of this guy posing as an intelligent man. He makes $12 million a year. And his question to you was, why aren't you admitting you're part of the 1%?
Yeah, well, it's I was confused by what the whole point of that was, because I thought he was trying to give me a compliment. I thought he was saying, well, hey, you do well, and you're down there in the rain in Zuccotti Park.
No.
It wasn't a compliment, maybe.
Is there a problem here? These people assume that if you're involved in something like this or anything else that is trying to help people who don't have that level of money, frankly, if that's you want to define it in terms of this amount or not having this amount, that anybody who does this is somehow necessarily anti-capitalism? Anti-capitalism is the wrong umbrella to it. It's the idea that weighted capitalism, fixed capitalism, in which there's no way for anybody who's not already got money to make money, is what everybody's opposed to.
It's a rigged game right now.
Exactly.
It's a rigged casino where only the top are getting away with this, and everybody else really doesn't have a chance to better. I mean, you showed it last night, the stagnation of wages over the last 30 years. Nobody's seen an increase in that. Many people have seen a decrease, a loss of benefits, et cetera. And look, I feel very blessed and very privileged. And some years I have really good years because the movie does well. Other years, like last year, I didn't make a movie or write a book. So, I didn't do that well. But
one thing you wrote about in the Post, in the letter, was that your adherence to this comes from what, Sunday school and Bible class and the little fundamental golden rule things. Isn't that what it is?
Yes, that we were taught that we're going to be judged by how we treat the least among us, and that if you do have the good fortune smile upon you, you have to do even more.
Right.
So you have a greater responsibility to stand up for those who are the have-nots, and I knew the folk singer Harry Chapin in the final years of his life. I don't know do you remember?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he did 200 concerts a year. 100 of them were benefits.
Unbelievable.
And I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, my philosophy is one for me, one for the other guy. And that kind of stuck with me, my whole life. And I just thought, boy, what a great way to live if I ever get lucky enough to do that. And so right away with Roger and me, my first film, I gave away half the money and proudly paid my taxes and told my guy, the tax guy, the accountant dude, the H&R Block, no commercials.
Yes, right.
I said no deductions other than the mortgage.
Yeah.
No deductions. I want to pay my full share here because I am proud to be an American and I am proud to spend that money as a citizen of this country. And right now, if any conservative is watching that just made their head explode.
Right.
Because
what? You can't make money off that without those deductions? What, are you crazy?
Right. Yes. And they hate having to pay for and fund this great country.
Yeah, exactly. Except for them.
Yeah.
Except for the parts they use.
Except for the parts that they use, right? And the parts that protect them, the parts that are not investigating them, the parts that are not regulating their Wall Street.
Yes.
Oh yeah. No.
Exactly.
They're all for that.
Michael Moore, who eventually will sit down here and will do a literary type interview with me on his great new sort of autobiography, Here Comes Trouble, and we'll finish up on the subject of Felix Unger money at some point, FU money. Now headed for Oakland. Safe travels, and give my best to everybody there.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you.
Not that Michael's medium or mine are passé, but we're clearly adjuncts to the real reporting done about Occupy. One of the key figures behind the extraordinary live stream of the protest worldwide joins me ahead on Countdown. Yeah. More breaking news on an extraordinary busy night for it from Occupy Oakland. The website, the Bay News, is that correct? The Bay News reporting that at 7 p.m. Pacific time, Mayor Jean Kwan of Oakland will address the General Assembly of Occupy Oakland, which 2 days ago the police raided, threw out, and sent one protester to the hospital with a broken skull. And now Mayor Kwan, who took considerable heat, and justifiably so, for what the police did in the name of her city, will be apparently in a matter of hours speaking at Occupy Wall Street at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. On the East Coast. With a new political force, of course, Occupy Wall Street has also created a new media. One of the men behind that joins me ahead. First, the quick sanity break, and on this date in 1918 was born the actress Teresa Wright, who at the age of 24 solidified her place with a sweet and moving performance as Mrs. Lou Gehrig in the movie Pride of the Yankees. 46 years after the film came out, then media director Rick Cerrone of the Yankees contacted Ms. Wright and asked her if she'd like to throw out the first pitch during ceremonies commemorating Gehrig's famous heartbreaking retirement speech. That's when she revealed she had never held a baseball in her life and knew nothing about the game. She participated anyway, and within weeks she had become a Yankee fan so ardent that she was learning to keep score while attending their playoff games at the age of 80. Time marches on. We begin in Russia. Another day, another badminton match between Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and former President Vladimir Putin. Wait, what? That's right. In an attempt to promote badminton to Russian youth, Medvedev posted this video on the official Kremlin blog. There's an official Kremlin blog. Looks like a great match, too, and the best part is it wasn't shirts and skins, so Putin didn't strip this time. We stay in Russia, where tough times means they can't afford those fancy cameras that'll take a photo whenever you run a red light, so they went with the next best thing, a cat on a traffic light. Run a red light, you have to just deal with Frisky up there. The only problem is you can't see the red light. Green means go, yellow means go slow, backlit kitty means stop. In Soviet Union, kitty stops you. Finally, we end with the TMO, also adorable clip of the day. Upside down, puppy snoring, cute baby giggling. It's why the internet was invented. Is it just me, or do they both sort of remind you of Winston Churchill? Time marches on. As his worldview has collapsed around him by Occupy Wall Street, Bill O'Reilly's lungs are aching and he's gasping for air. A positive poll about Occupy, he explains, is only that way because people don't understand that if you don't let employers exploit workers, you instantly turn into Cuba. Coming up. For the first time. Who is this man, and why is he key to the Occupy protests? Well, you've watched any part of it online, you largely have him to thank. First, the worst. Silence. Who dares to come before the mighty Kane? The ex-staffer who claims he and his colleagues were told, do not speak to Mr. Kane unless he has spoken to you first. Humbly. One of the key figures behind the extraordinary internet access to Occupy, how and why the only weapon the protesters will ever use is a camera. He's next. First, because that's kind of the philosophy behind what we do here. Countdown, top 3 nominees for today's worst persons in the world. LeBron's DeBello the Clown. His Tuesday prediction on the political whorehouse that is Fox News, that the media would stop covering Occupy, failed before he got home from work that night. His other forecast, that approval for the movement in polls would plummet, would crash when a New York Times survey came out, indicating only 27% of Americans disagreed with Occupy's points. Worse still, that 66% of Americans feel money and wealth are not distributed fairly in this country. This set him off worse than a wet falafel. The key word in that question is distributed. Because wealth is not distributed in America, there's no central authority that doles out salaries and investment returns. You either earn it, steal it, inherit it, or win the lottery. There's no distribution. Bill doesn't understand the meaning of the word distribution as in the sentence, the scattered loofahs were distributed evenly across the Thai strip club. He went to Marist College. He played football. Well, he was a punter. The problem is that many Americans simply don't understand what's at stake here. The Occupy Wall Street movement is basically socialistic. It essentially wants the government to control who gets what. Wrong. It doesn't want the government to control who, namely the already rich, get more of the what. That's what they want. There's no question that capitalism isn't perfect or fair. Some people who get wealthy do so by exploiting workers. That's always happened. But the alternative is Cuba or Greece. Do Americans really want that? The only alternative to exploiting workers is becoming Cuba or Greece? I used to think there was some kind of skewed intelligence going on over there. Now I think it's just skewed with a comb over. The runner-up, Herman Cain, your pretend candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. He may be the first guy ever at the top of the polls or nearly so to see his campaign end, but don't tell him. The New York Times reports from inside the campaign of that email to the staff about traveling in a car with Mr. Kaine. Do not speak to him unless you are spoken to, the memo said. I found it odd, said a former staff member who liked to prep Mr. Kaine for appearances while driving. Setting up offices was also something of a trial. When I told people you'll be getting offices and phone lines, I'd have to postpone that, the former staffer in Iowa said. It was like they were running for sophomore class president. Former Kaine, Iowa staffer Kevin Hall added, we couldn't even get our own email addresses for the campaign. But you could get plenty of smokes. You could always get smokes from the big guy. But our winner, another apparently pretend candidate, Governor Rick Perry of Texas. Spokesman Mark Minor said the governor is considering not participating in all of the remaining 17 Republican debates. Minor insisted that this was a time management issue and has nothing to do with the amazing job of self-destruction Perry has performed at some of the previous debates.
Is it the Mitt Romney that was on the side of against the Second Amendment before he was for the Second Amendment? Was before he was before these social programs from the standpoint of he was for standing up for Roe versus Wade before he was against Roe versus Wade?
Sure enough, Rick. Perry might skip some of the remaining debates. His performance at those debates is thus not expected to suffer. Governor Rick Perry of Texas, today's worst person in the world. You will not be able to stay home. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and drop out, because in our number one story, the revolution will not be televised. In the case of the Occupy movement, it will, in fact, be on the internet. The movement began with a post on the website Adbusters on July 13th. On September 17th, we want to see 20,000 people flood into lower Manhattan, set up tents, kitchens, peaceful barricades, and occupy Wall Street for a few months. After the movement used the web to launch itself, it used it to grow itself, forming over 400 Facebook groups sporting more than 200,000 members, with at least one group in each state. A website devoted to the sole purpose of getting people together to form their own local Occupy movements and finding others to join. Countless Occupy Twitter accounts keeping members and observers abreast of every second-by-second development, as well as tweets of support from those who are not able to attend the protests, and a video site that features streaming video of live events, as well as constantly uploaded videos shot by protesters on the ground, making sure that the video we showed earlier of last night's New York march in solidarity with Oakland, creating response from the Oakland playbook by the NYPD, was seen by the world. Joining me now, the man responsible for that video, as well as many others, as part of globalrevolution.tv, Vlad Teichberg. It's good to meet you, sir.
Good to meet you, too.
Would this thing exist were it not for social media and the capability to use live stream on the internet?
Well, the fundamental problems that are facing us cut pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
So whether there would have been informational revolution or not, is something probably would have been happening. But the one thing informational revolution did is it made all of us more equal.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to when the Gutenberg press was invented. That something has changed.
Right.
And now everybody has access to the same information, and we're becoming equal. So the same needs for the hierarchy we had before is disappearing.
The police pursuit in Los Angeles of Rodney King began just before midnight, Saturday, March 2, 1991. It was televised at about, the tape of it was televised about 10:20 p.m. on Monday, March 4th of that year. That was about 45 hours after the beating started. It was not the lead story, and when it went on TV, the media did not know Rodney King's name. That's a 45-hour span of 20 years ago. As we sit here right now, it has not yet been 45 hours since Scott Olson was hit by the canister in Oakland. In that time, we've had protest marches in other cities. Oakland's mayor has done a 180 and is now going to see Occupy Oakland tonight. Occupy was readmitted to protest in Oakland. There's an internal police investigation and the possibility of a general strike in two of the largest cities of the country. Is there any way to overstate the importance of the speed of the live stream concept and of the web in general to this movement?
It's very important. I don't think it's the most important thing. The most important thing is actually the conversation we're having about the future of our society. I mean, all of these tools are there to facilitate that conversation. The important thing is the debate that's happening in every square across our land about where we're going to go next.
How do you do this financially? Because as unbelievably easier financially as it is now to do something like this than it would have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's still, it costs, doesn't it?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, it costs something, but it costs very little. We were using this company called Livestream, which provided us with free accounts to do streaming. We basically needed a laptop, a webcam, and a hotspot. That's all it takes.
And you get Do you use your own editorial judgment as to what's going out? Do you put it all out simultaneously? How do you juggle all this when so many things are happening simultaneously?
You can't really edit in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's part of the reason why this medium is so perfect for what we're doing, because it actually tells the truth. Because there's no question that we've edited it. It is what it is.
But do you ever have to make a decision between, events in Boston and events in Europe? Remember the night of the raid in Boston, you were bouncing back and forth when Boston dropped out to various other sites.
Well, that's why what's going on right now with our group is that we started this in New York. And this worked in New York really well. It stopped us from being overrun by the police. It allowed us to show the world that we're human beings just like them. And so on and so on. Now, what we started, we were not equipped to go out and shoot everywhere. So we basically convinced Livestream to start offering these accounts to everybody. Because what happened with us actually was very interesting. Advertisers said they don't want to advertise on our channel. And Livestream the company had to make a choice. They either censor us or they take a financial loss and provide us with free account with no advertising. And they chose to do the right thing. And then they chose to do for everyone. So anyway, so the bottom line is suddenly these options to stream became available to every single occupation around the country, in the world. And we just started running a campaign basically 3 weeks ago telling every Occupy to start setting up your media center. And that's how it happened. So basically, we're actually not in charge or in control of anything, except people are starting to do it. The only thing we need to do now is we need to teach people how to do it well.
Last thing, tell me what you used to do for a living. It seems to become somewhat ironic and even funny in this context.
Well, I used to be a derivatives trader. It has come up quite a lot. I mean, and the thing is, I mean, people ask me a lot about this. I went into derivatives trading back before it became a toxic cesspool it became. In the beginning, it was presented to us just like globalization was, as something that will actually make the world a better place. Of course, that combined with corruption and greed, it became something else.
Well, now, I think you're onto something that actually is going to make the world a better place. Vlad Teichberg of globalrevolution.tv. I said it right this time, thank goodness. Great thanks for your time, and even greater thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
All right, let's recap the night's many breaking headlines. Injured Occupy Oakland protester Scott Olson has awakened from sedation. He can make himself understood by writing, not yet by speaking, so his roommate tells Countdown. The LA Times quotes neurosurgeons who say they'll still think he's going to require surgery to relieve pressure on his brain. The mayor of Oakland, Gene Kwan, will, according to BayCitizen.org, address the General Assembly of Occupy Oakland tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific, and that group has called for a general strike in protest of the police violence on November 2nd in Oakland. Occupy Wall Street has endorsed that call. That's Countdown. I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night and good luck.